Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we discuss all things strange and spooky. And this week, we're talking about something that is very much of interest to me. One of my favorite places, Gettysburg. So, this will be a Gettysburg Ghosts episode. I'm wearing my Gettysburg hat today, my Gettysburg t shirt. Even the beer I'm drinking today is, let me spin that around, Getty's Brow from Fourscore Brewing, right in Gettysburg. So, delicious beer. So I wanted to talk about all the alleged hauntings and ghost stories from Gettysburg because I've been going to Gettysburg probably since 2014, usually about twice a year. There have been a few years where we couldn't make it more than that, pandemic times and other things, but have been going fairly regularly since 2014. First time I ever went was when I was about 12 or 13, and I was pretty bored by it, as I think most kids would be. But as an adult, it's much more fascinating. I love history. Usually go with my dad, my uncle, my son, and we have a great time. Just the town, the battlefields, the history. We don't really go there to ghost hunt. We're aware of the haunted history that Gettysburg is alleged to have. All the ghost stories, we're familiar with them. We don't go there to ghost hunt, really. We go there. It's a nice little vacation. It's fun, it's relaxed, it gets us outside, it gets us walking, and we just love it there. So we don't go there and do any ghost hunting. I'm not judging anybody who does go there for those reasons, but just not why we go there, despite being a paranormal podcast and blogger and investigator. It's not why I go there. But I wanted to go over some Gettysburg stories today and just talk to you about those, and also tell you about a few of weird experiences that I've had there. And again, as always, I will not say that these were paranormal. I'm not going to say that these were ghosts. They were weird things that could be any number of things, but I thought maybe you guys would like to hear them. So before I continue, I just want to put out a disclaimer here. I am not a Gettysburg expert. I may get a few things wrong. The sites that I'm reading from, they may have a few things wrong. I'm going to give my thoughts on some of these stories because some of them, there's some issues I take with them, and there's a lot about the Civil War and the Battle of Gettysburg that is just unknown to us. And a lot of people just sort of fill in the blanks and things get made up. Urban legends spring out of that, and it becomes truth. You know, people think that these things are true, and because they're just retold so many times, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But I just want to say from the get-go, I'm not an expert, despite having gone there for many, many years. And I know a lot of the history there. A lot of this is just my opinion. So if you hear it, don't get offended if I'm wrong or if you don't agree with me. It's just my opinions on certain things. And I do come from a more skeptical point of view. But overall, I hope you guys enjoy the stories. If you've been to Gettysburg, if you have a story, a ghost story, any other weird story from Gettysburg, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. Or if you have any other sort of ghost story, UFO encounter, Bigfoot sighting, anything like that that you want to share on the channel or just with me, and I can read it on the channel for you, again, shoot me the email, jason@oddanduntold.com. So let's get right to it. I'm going to first start off with just some more well-known stories from Gettysburg that I can find on the internet. And again, I can't vouch for the veracity of any of these. I'm just relaying them to you because I love Gettysburg, and I know a lot of people out there love Gettysburg and want to know more about it. Not everybody can visit it. It's only about three hours and 15 minutes from where I live, so it's fairly easy for us to get to. But I know a lot of people who'd love to go there and can't get there, so I thought this would be a cool episode just to talk about my experiences. I was just there a few weeks ago, but just to talk about my love of Gettysburg, some of the haunted history behind it, and fill everybody in. So let me share my screen here. So these first couple of stories are coming from the Gettysburg Battlefield Bus Tours website, which is pretty cool because they're in town. They have the bus tours, and they take people around town and to all the sites. So very cool company. It's cool that they have this section on their website about the ghost stories that are there. So the first one I'm going to read, this is about the Gettysburg Orphanage, and this is a place I've never actually been to in Gettysburg. So this is interesting to me, but I'll read the story and then I'll give, a little bit of my thoughts on this. So the Gettysburg Orphanage. Among the most haunted structures in Gettysburg is the Gettysburg Orphanage, a building that locals say is active with paranormal activity. Originally a private home, During the famous battle, it was converted into a makeshift hospital for the wounded soldiers, its cellar filled with the bodies of the dead and dying. Some paranormal investigators believe that their souls remain stuck there, doomed to roam the area because they never found closure and properly moved on to the afterlife. After the Battle of Gettysburg, the facility was converted into an orphanage, initially intended to house children who had lost their parents in the battle. The fate of that orphanage took a frightening turn when Rosa J. Carmichael assumed the post of headmistress. It was later whispered by certain knowledgeable town residents that Carmichael tortured and chained orphan children in dungeons she secretly created in the cellar there. Supernatural believers also assert that her monstrous doings in life have since kept her evil spirit locked up in the building, where it remains, manifesting itself into hapless visitors. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. This story, like I said, I've never been here. A lot of buildings in the town, a lot of the farms and barns surrounding the town, almost any large building that could be commandeered was taken over as a field hospital for the wounded soldiers. So that doesn't surprise me. The legend here about Rosa Carmichael, I've never heard this one before, but it sounds very familiar to me. And if you've watched my episode, and I'll link to it in the description below, about the matron's house here on Staten Island, it's a very similar story. The matron, who is sort of like the headmistress of Snug Harbor, allegedly had a child out of wedlock that she kept in the basement, chained up, tortured him. He eventually escaped and murdered her. So it's a sort of tried and true trope. Say that 5 times fast. But I can't speak to the veracity of that. It's a cool story. It's just anytime I hear this sort of same thing repeated, it makes me wonder, like, is this just something that we have in our cultural zeitgeist that just gets sort of, put onto other places and just local legends that kind of propagate through different towns? Or is there some truth to this? I don't know. If anybody has information on that, feel free to contact me, leave a comment below. But I just thought that was interesting. So let's move down to the Jennie Wade house. So the Jennie Wade house. Not far from the Gettysburg Orphanage, just as it stood during the Civil War, there still stands another reputedly haunted place, a smallish cottage now referred to as the Jennie Wade house. It is preserved as a modern shrine to the memory of Mary Virginia Jennie Wade, who retains the dubious honor of being the only civilian killed during the Battle of Gettysburg. Jennie was a mere 20 years of age when the war came to her hometown of Gettysburg. Standing in the house on the morning of July 3rd, 1863, her life came to a sudden and tragic end right before her mother's eyes. A stray bullet from the battle outside punched straight through the doors, striking Jennie in the heart and killing her instantly. Miss Wade was known to be engaged to a certain Corporal Johnson Jack Skelly. Sadly, the news of his fiance's death never reached him, as he died in captivity many miles away not long after Jennie's death. To this day, visitors to the house report hearing strange, unexplained movements, unanswered voices, and the fearful moaning of disincorporated spirits at various places in the house. Many believe that Jennie Wade haunts Gettysburg because after the formal battle cemetery was constructed, her body was exhumed from its original burial site and laid to rest beside Skelly. Some speculate that by moving her gravesite, her spirit was disturbed and doomed to linger in Gettysburg forever. This story is very familiar to me. I've only been to the Jennie Wade house once. That was my very first visit to Gettysburg. We had stopped in. We had just missed a tour, and they had said, if you guys want to come back in like 45 minutes, you can join the next tour. So we said, yeah, we'll go around town and come back. We never made it back that trip because that was, I believe it was just like a short overnight trip. And for whatever reason, we've just never made it back. I mean, we tend to get great weather in Gettysburg. We spend a lot of our time out on the battlefield exploring, and we just don't do a lot of the indoor activities. And when we do, it's something like the visitor center or the seminary museum. So those are much more intensive indoor things. They take hours. So I just haven't been back to the Jennie Wade house, but a cool story. And yeah, she was probably one of the most famous people from the Battle of Gettysburg, aside from like General Lee, because she was the only civilian killed during the battle. And the battle raged through the town. So it's amazing that more civilians were not injured. But very famous story. So a lot of people who are familiar with Gettysburg will know Jennie Wade. So the next story is about the Dobbin House Inn. And this is a place, it was built in Revolutionary War time. So this goes back even way past the Civil War. There's a restaurant now down in the tavern in the basement of this building. Very cool. This is like one of our must go to places to eat when we're in Gettysburg. So I'll read the story about the Dobbin House Inn. This old stone house was famously once a stopping point on the Underground Railroad. Slaves who hid here en route to freedom further north were forced to conceal themselves for lengthy periods in tiny, secret hiding places located beneath the floor and in the walls of the inn building. Those hiding places still exist and can be viewed by modern visitors. It is believed that the ghost of the inn's owner and founder, Alexander Dobbin, still appears at various places throughout the inn, always smoking a cigar. Some believe that many of the slaves who came to this house in search of freedom and safety may have returned here from beyond the grave, or else the spirits of some who never survived their flight to reach this place may have eventually arrived anyway and stayed. Spectral manifestations of slaves and the ghosts of soldiers have both been seen haunting the building, and strange, unexplained bloodstains are said to manifest on the floorboards only to disappear in the light of day. This is another story I'm very familiar with. Again, we've gone to the Dobbin House, I think, at least once on every trip there. So we've been there multiple times. If you go to the second floor, they actually have a space preserved kind of behind glass, and it kind of shows you the slaves' quarters, like where they were hiding on the Underground Railroad when they were escaping the South. And it's disturbing, very cramped quarters, and you kind of see how they would have to live to protect themselves and reach freedom ultimately. So very, very spooky, especially about the bloodstained hands. I've heard that. I've never seen anything. Again, anytime we're eating there, we're down in the tavern. It's always crowded. It's a very popular place. So I've never had any experiences there. I can't speak to that, but a very cool place. And if you're in town, definitely check it out. It's a very old building, and the tavern is awesome. I mean, it's all candlelight, and the bar is old. I mean, you go down there and you just kind of feel like you've stepped back in time. So very cool place. Check it out. Very creepy, cool story as well. Okay, so another really famous, popular place in Gettysburg is Sachs Covered Bridge. Clearly a covered bridge going over Marsh Creek. And this is a place where you can find lots of ghost hunters. I mean, in the middle of the day, dead of night, there's always somebody there, like with a spirit box or an EMF detector. It's known as a very haunted location. So let me tell the story here, and then I'll give you my thoughts on this because I have a few. A lovely example of the picturesque covered bridges still to be found in Pennsylvania, Sachs Covered Bridge has been a permanent fixture on Waterworks Road going all the way back to its construction in 1852. It would experience heavy use during the Civil War by both Union and Confederate troops, each side crossing the bridge in their turn depending on the ebbs and tides of the fortunes of war. It was the Confederate Army who passed through the Sachs Bridge during their retreat after the Battle of Gettysburg. Legends tell of 3 Confederate deserters captured by their officers and hanged in retribution from the covered bridge. Some say the 3 soldiers were in fact Confederate spies executed by Union troops for the crime of espionage. In either case, the spirits of the executed men are widely believed to haunt the vicinity of the bridge. Visitors have recounted bizarre occurrences on the bridge itself, the spectral smell of phantom cigar smoke, the sound of ghostly cannons fired in the distance, or the sensation of suddenly feeling someone tap them on the shoulder, only to turn around to find that no one is there. So I'm going to go to a different tab. So I'm on another site here, and this is from the Gettysburg Hotel. And they have a little ghost story section as well. And they mention Sachs Bridge. And I'll read this. Rumors around town have been shared that the 3 Confederate soldiers deserted their unit during the Battle of Gettysburg. Upon capture, they were killed at the bridge. Because of their untimely demise, people have said they've spotted shadows and outlines of soldiers on the bridge, mists that arise from the water in the shape of men, and shadows, clouds, and dark spots in photographs taken there. So this is, again, very well-known spot in Gettysburg. I've heard the stories many, many times. And I've also heard that a lot of these stories are false. And again, I'm no expert on the Civil War or the Battle of Gettysburg, but there's a couple of things here that make me doubt a lot of this. So one, for the Confederates to be hanging people on this bridge, they were retreating. They just lost a 3-day battle. They got their butts handed to them. So they were retreating. They were afraid that the Union troops were going to follow them and just try to wipe them out. So these guys were beating a hasty retreat. And there were thousands and thousands of men. And the 3 days of the battle, it was hot and humid. It was early July. And the day that they left on July 4th, it was pouring rain. Just driving, pouring rain. These guys were cold and wet, trying to get out of town. I can't believe that they would just stop at this bridge, knowing that the Union troops, or not knowing, but suspecting that the Union troops could be on their tail. They're going to stop and just hang three guys from this bridge. Their retreat train was 17 miles long. You don't hold up that many troops to just stop and hang deserters or spies if it was the Union. And if it was the Union was based a few miles from this. The battle, this is close to the battle, but it's not near the battlefield. So if prisoners were going to be hung, they probably would have found the nearest tree and just done that. Hung them from there, hang them from there. I don't think they're going to walk all the way out to Sachs Covered Bridge to hang them from there. The bridge was also washed away in the early 90s by a big flood. And so where the bridge sits now is not where it originally sat. Not that that means anything. I mean, the energy could be connected to the wood. I get that. But I think a lot of the people seeing mists and orbs in their photos, this is right above water. So you're going to get water droplets. You're going to get fog. I mean, I've been in Gettysburg. There was one night we were there, and it was almost like a horror movie. We were just sitting on the battlefield at night. It was dark. You're not allowed to be on the battlefield past sunset now, but this is years ago when the park was open till 10 p.m. every night. We were out there probably about 9:30 at night, sitting in the car, and this fog just rolled in out of nowhere. And it was one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. Very cool, but very creepy. I'm a city boy. I'm from New York City, and we don't get that too often. But out there, this fog just kind of rose up and rolled in and out of nowhere. So I'm always suspicious of photos of orbs or mist, especially near water. You have running water. There's like a waterfall down the stream a little bit. So you're going to have water droplets, mist. It doesn't surprise me that people are taking pictures of mist. I just don't think it's a ghost. So again, not to say it's not haunted, but I just think those photographs of mist or orbs have to be really taken with a grain of salt. It also mentions the smell of phantom cigar smoke, which happens a lot on the battlefield. And I'll get into that a little bit later, because I want to talk about the cigar smoke and the gunshots that people tend to hear sometimes, because I think there's explanations for that. And I'll give you a story that sort of makes my case. So, but for now, let's move on to, this is the Farnsworth House Inn. Another of the most haunted buildings in Gettysburg is the Farnsworth House Inn. One of 400 buildings that existed in the town at the time of the battle, it survived the dread doings of that dark day. During the actual battle itself, local families sought shelter in the house cellar as bullets thumped into the walls above and the battle raged over their heads. Today, it's claimed that the house is haunted by no less than 16 distinct spirits, including that of an 88-year-old boy, several Civil War soldiers, and a former midwife. Sounds of disembodied breathing, grunts, voices, and the musical strains of a jaw harp, along with a strong scent of cigars, have been experienced by guests who visit the home. Throughout the years, multiple photographs of a spiritual manifestation have been taken through the window of a certain haunted guest room, viewed from the street below. Farnsworth House, I love this place. We go here all the time. They also have a tavern in the basement, Sweeney's Tavern. And again, it's one of our must-go-to places when we're in town. They have great food. The bar downstairs is not as old-looking as the Dobbin House. They have a lot of memorabilia from the movie Gettysburg. So, cool place. There are bullet holes on the outside of the building. You can still see them. They're kind of painted white so that your eye is drawn to them. So that I always thought was very cool. Again, have never had any experiences there, never seen anything, but we're always there for meals. And so there's waiters and waitresses and bartenders and servers and cooks and other patrons running around. So we've never really heard or seen anything. They do rent out the rooms. They do advertise them as being haunted. That always sort of rubs me a little bit the wrong way, because is the place really haunted, or are they exaggerating the claims a little bit to bring more people in? I don't know. I'm not making any claims, but I just, it always makes me raise an eyebrow when a place kind of sells their business on being haunted. So there are hotel rooms. A lot of people say they're haunted. Again, I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying I kind of take these things with a grain of salt. So you should too. But a very cool place to visit regardless. I mean, just for the history alone, worth the visit. So check it out if you're ever in town. Okay, so the last story on this page that I want to talk about is Gettysburg College. Another reputedly haunted area is the campus of Gettysburg College, where many unexplained events are said to have occurred. From the college have come reports of a spectral Confederate sentry still standing watch in a cupola overlooking the campus. Another tale concerns an elevator located in an administrative office building, now known as Pennsylvania Hall, and which existed in 1837, that is said to bypass the first floor, instead carrying unwilling passengers straight to the basement, where the doors open on a grisly spectral image of crude Civil War era surgery being performed by ghostly surgeons. This is another one. I've driven past Gettysburg College, which used to be Pennsylvania College. I've heard the story of the basement where the doors open, and this is something you hear a lot from Gettysburg is almost like this look into the past, where people will report seeing inside of old buildings or out on the battlefield, almost like a scene being replayed from the battle or from a hospital. They'll see soldiers, they'll see surgeons, they'll see dead bodies, and it's almost like not a ghost necessarily, but it's almost like they're looking into the past. So very interesting story. I've heard that story before. There's a series of books by author Mark Nesbitt, who was a former park ranger there at Gettysburg, and he wrote a whole bunch of books, The Ghosts of Gettysburg. So you can check those out. And I believe he initially had this story about the basement in his book. And I know there's also a place in town that's now like a historic photo place where you can go and kind of get dressed up and get a historic photo taken of yourself. But that building was where they took, I believe, General Reynolds' body after he was shot and killed. And people have stated that they've looked in the window at night there and seen a similar thing, like someone keeping watch over his body when was a gift shop. So people have seen these weird things, and very interesting just to have that look back into the past, that people report this. And again, there could be explanations for that, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But just thought that was a cool story. Okay, so I'm bouncing over again to the Gettysburg Hotel website, where they have some other stories and a few things that were not on the other page. So I'm going to talk about those. First one is Devil's Den. So I'll read about this. This natural rock formation on the grounds of the battlefield proved to be a strategic asset to the troops of the Civil War. The formation was named such after local residents believed that a large snake was in residence. Varying accounts of the size of the creature range from 8 to 15 feet, therefore earning the nickname the Devil. Visitors to the historical landmark have reported hearing sounds of drums and gunshots, as well as sightings of a barefoot, shabby-dressed man who tries to give directions, or the sensation of someone holding their hand. One of the most popular stories that come from this area is that when visitors try to take a picture, there is usually some sort of camera malfunction that prevents them from capturing the scenery. Devil's Den is very cool. It's just a geologic formation of huge boulders. Again, a place on the battlefield that we always stop at. Sadly, there's usually people letting their kids run all over this, and it's dangerous. And you often hear about people falling and breaking an ankle or getting hurt because they've fallen between the boulders. It's huge. It's huge. And I'll try to put some photos up in here of it if I can find some. But if you look at this photo right here, let me see if I can click on this. That gave me an old photo of it, but you can look here to see the path. I mean, these boulders are huge. I mean, enormous. They're like the size of small buildings. So very dangerous place. But I've heard the story of the ghost, the shabbily dressed man. Allegedly, he's from a Texas regiment, which Texas was the frontier back then. It was still kind of rough and tumble. So they say that the troops from Texas were a rough-looking lot. They just, just more so than the typical, maybe better groomed Civil War soldier. They were just shabbily dressed, barefoot. They were from out west. So, but that's what they say he might possibly be from. Uh, as far as taking the pictures and the camera malfunction, I've mainly heard that about Triangular Field, which is right behind Devil's Den. And there's not much there. It's a field, as the name implies. I've been there multiple times as well. I've been to Devil's Den. I've been to Triangular Field. My camera has never once malfunctioned. And again, I'm not discounting people who have claimed that it has. It's just for an area that supposedly, allegedly has this reputation that if you go there, your camera's going to malfunction. My camera's never malfunctioned. Nobody I know has had a camera malfunction there. It works perfectly. So interesting story. And again, I'm not discounting anybody's experience if you've had one there. And if you have, let me know in the comments below, because I'd love to hear it. That's the paranormal for you. There's no rhyme or reason. It's very hard to replicate things. So I'm just saying it's never happened to me. So if it's happened to you, let us know. Gettysburg Hotel. Our own hotel has been known to have a few paranormal guests as well as our regular clientele. Most guests talk about seeing Rachel, who's believed to be a Civil War era nurse. She is said to be looking for wounded soldiers that she can care for, as well as opening drawers and removing the contents. Past guests have also reported seeing a wounded soldier and a lady dancing at the center of the ballroom. These are stories I've never really heard of. I've passed by the Gettysburg Hotel. Again, the stories sound a little cliche to me. It's, the woman in white or the nurse who wants to help a soldier. I'm not discounting it, but sometimes these stories just sound a little too familiar. And you're like, I've heard about this from like every town. And it doesn't make it untrue. It just makes me take things with a grain of salt. And again, maybe it's just something about those professions that make people turn into ghosts. And I could be completely wrong. But the skeptical side of me says this is probably more folklore than actual story. And these stories just kind of get, passed from person to person, word of mouth, and they evolve into these same stories that you hear over and over again. So we'll go back down the page. I already talked about Sachs Bridge. We'll talk about the Tillie House Inn. Many historians and people of the time would tell you that the monumental Battle of Gettysburg took place all over the city and not just on the designated field. Due to a large number of casualties that the battle caused, any building was turned into a field hospital, and every person who was standing was a nurse. At the Tillie House Inn, people have reported hearing footsteps walking above them, spirits sitting on the beds with them, and a soldier constantly walking up and down the stairs, almost as if he's patrolling the area. Tillie House is a very cool place. I've never actually been able to go in. Every time we go, they seem to be closed. And whenever they're open, we seem to be somewhere else on the battlefield and we forget. And then we remember at like 4:30 and can't get back over there on time. So it's a place I'd love to go to. But, again, you're hearing the stories of soldiers on patrol, footsteps. So interesting things. And like I mentioned, they mentioned it here too, that any building that was available that could house them, they tried turning into a field hospital. And people in town became makeshift nurses. They were assisting the surgeons who were there. There were just so many wounded and so many people who needed help that anybody who stayed in town was helping in some way, either getting water or helping the surgeons or preparing food. So very sad stories, but you hear them over and over again. So now I just want to turn my attention to Reddit. I did an episode about Reddit ghost stories a few episodes back. People seem to really like it. So I was looking on Reddit for Gettysburg stories and found a surprising lack of them. And I don't know if my keyword search is not great or I'm just not finding them for whatever reason. But I'm going to try to pull up some stories that I did find on Reddit. So I'll read those to you in a moment here. Okay, so one person here, sad ex crying ex soul, 5 years ago, said Big Round Top is supposedly a hotspot for activity. I went during the day and it had eerie vibes, but nothing outside of that for me. Big Round Top didn't see a lot of action, so that's interesting to me. On the flip side, Big Round Top is imposing. It's got a weird vibe. I will admit to that. I mean, from the first time I went there, my attention was drawn to it, and I didn't know anything really about the history my first time there as an adult. I mean, as a kid, I knew even less, but as an adult, I really didn't know much of what went on there. But Big Round Top is just imposing, and there is a weird vibe to it, but no real action happened on Big Round Top. It was mostly Little Round Top. which is right next to Big Round Top, the Round Tops. So I don't know why it's a hot spot for activity, but I thought it was interesting that this guy or this person got weird vibes out of it as well, because I totally did my first time there. It just drew my attention, and I was like, I don't quite like looking at that place. It just gave me like a weird feeling. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. Ookie Spooky Me says the triangular field is supposedly a hotbed of activity, but I walked it and nothing happened. Same with me. I was just mentioning that when I was talking about Devil's Den. Triangular field, that's where your cameras are supposed to stop working, and you're going to have malfunctions, and any electrical equipment is supposed to die on you, and battery drains and stuff like that. But it's never happened to me, never happened to Ookie Spooky Me either, apparently. Lee's headquarters Quality Inn, no longer there. Thank God the Battlefield Trust bought the property, got rid of the Quality Inn, and have restored Lee's headquarters to the way it was during the battle. So bravo to them. These other ones I've mentioned, Jennie Wade, Devil's Den, Big Round Top, and Little Round Top. Little Round Top saw a lot of action. The Union troops held the high ground, so the Confederates were trying to push their way up from Devil's Den, from the triangular field, and the Union troops were firing down on them. So a lot of action happened there, a lot of bloody battles. But I haven't heard any specific stories about Little Round Top. Just, we'd run into ghost hunters up there sometimes, not the TV show, just local amateur ghost hunters, usually kids going up there and doing EVP sessions or whatever, but I've never heard any stories about it. So let me just go to another tab. So here's another thread, and this is from 4 years ago, and there's not many replies on here. Have you experienced ghosts in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? So Black Cats, Black Bats writes, go and walk the battlefields. People usually see the most activity in the early hours around dawn. I've heard phantom cannon fire and have seen full apparitions. Source, Civil War reenactor. Everything I've witnessed has occurred when no events were scheduled. So I wanted to talk about this one, and I'll bring this back to the cigar smoke, to the phantom cannon fire, to music, to voices, to glimpses into the past, all of these things, which, again, I'm not saying I can explain them, but I do think there are explanations. For one example, we were visiting the Spangler House, not the Spangler Farm. This is the Spangler House off of Confederate Avenue. And we were right around the barn, and I was smoking a cigar. We're outside, we're just walking the trail, smoking a cigar, and there's a horse trail that goes through there. So they have people who go on horses, and they have guided tours through the horse trails of the battlefield. And so they come upon us, and, we say hi to them. And there's this woman who starts laughing, and she's like, oh my God. She's like, I knew I smelled cigar smoke. She's like, I thought you were a ghost. She's like, I thought I was smelling like a phantom smell, but it was before they rounded the corner. But and they were pretty far away, but it just goes to show that just because you smell something doesn't mean it's a ghost. But that was her first thought. She was like, oh, it must be a ghost, because she had heard these stories about the phantom smells, and she smelled my cigar smoke. She didn't see us yet. We were being pretty quiet. It was only 3 of us at the time. So we were in a large group, and they were all on horseback. So you get the click, 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 clap of the horseshoes. And she smelled the smoke and was like, oh my God, I thought you were a ghost. And again, I'm not saying that this explains all the phantom smells, but it's just to show that you need to take it with a grain of salt. Phantom cannon fire. People hear this all the time. And all I can say to you is that there are a lot of deer stands and hunting stands around the battlefield. We've stumbled on them, just, getting lost on a trail, exploring the battlefield. I mean, a lot of the battlefield abuts private property, and you can easily just get to the edge of the battlefield and see 100 yards into the trees, and there's a deer stand. People go hunting. So you're going to hear gunshots. You're going to hear what may sound like cannon fire to you. Again, I'm not saying it explains it all. I'm not saying if you've heard it that it's not ghostly or paranormal. It's just, you have to take these things into account, that you're not in the city. You're in a place where hunting is prevalent. A lot of people go hunting out there. And there's also reenactments. And just because you're on one part of the battlefield, 2 miles away on a completely different battlefield, they could be doing a reenactment and shooting a cannon or shooting guns. We've been there when they've been doing this. And even just musket fire, someone will shoot a musket and you can just hear it bouncing off the hills for seconds. I mean, because you'll just hear the echo going through the valleys. So to me, the phantom cannon fire or the phantom gun fire doesn't really prove the paranormal for me, because it could be too easily explained. And I think the same goes for voices. The sound carries. And another example is we were up on Little Round Top one night. It's probably 9:30 at night. It was late. And from Little Round Top, you can look down and see Devil's Den. And we could see little flashlights going. So ghost hunters are up on the rocks. And we could hear them clearly doing an EVP session. It was, quiet. It was at night. It was calm. And they're not yelling. They're just talking, but we could hear them very clearly. Is there anybody here with us? And I just said back, no. And you could hear them all down there laughing. And it just goes to show that how far the sound can carry when you're not even speaking that loudly. And we weren't. They weren't. They're sitting there, is anybody here with us? And we could hear them. We clearly hear them, just the way the sound travels through the fields and up the mountains. And so that's something you have to watch out for as well. It's just because you can't see people doesn't mean that there aren't people there. So if you hear voices, you got to take a step back and say, well, wait a second, could that have just been people on the other side of the field, on the other side of a tree? I'll tell another story that was weird for me. We were on Confederate Avenue. We were by the Virginia Monument and Pickett's Charge, and the field is all open in front of you, but there's this line of trees off to the right if you're looking towards the high water mark. And so we were walking Pickett's Charge one night. Again, we used to love going at night. It's just so much more peaceful. And we just loved kind of seeing the battlefield at night, just because you see it during the day, and that's how most people see it. But at night, there's fewer people there. And it's just interesting to think about what these guys did at night when the battle kind of paused for the evening. These guys would go back and tend to their wounded and feed the horses and cook dinner. And, it's cool to just imagine all the campfires and the singing and the crying and, just to immerse ourselves in that. Like I said, we didn't do ghost hunting. This is not what we were there for. But anyway, I'm walking up Pickett's Charge, and to the right, it's kind of wooded. And I'm walking, and I start seeing these little blue orbs of light moving in the woods. And I'm like, no, that must have just been a trick of my eye. And I keep walking, and I see them again and again. And this is where the Confederate line had kind of lined up on day 3, Pickett's Charge and Longstreet's division. General Lee was back, tons and tons, thousands and thousands of Confederate guys back there, wounded, dying, fighting. And I'm seeing these blue orbs, these little blue orbs of light that would move through the woods and then disappear. And then you'd see another one over here. And I'm like, no way, no way. So I investigated. I went into the woods a little bit. They turned out to be lightning bugs. And up by me in New York City, lightning bugs are like a yellowish amber sort of color. And I thought they were all like that. So I didn't know they had blue lightning bugs anywhere. So there was that little bit of doubt in my mind when I first saw them, because I was like, that's weird. Like, I'm seeing blue orbs of light. And I didn't think lightning bug at first, because to me, lightning bugs are yellow. But I walked into the woods and I can clearly kind of see them flying by me, and they were blue. So not deep blue, but just that sort of shade of blue, a little hint of blue. So that was always very interesting to me. The last thing is reenactors, and you have to be careful, because even when there's because again, this black cats, black bats person says here, everything I've witnessed has occurred when no events were scheduled. And that's fine. He may have known that there's no scheduled events on the battlefield. However, my family and I in our travels have come across a lot of non-sanctioned reenactors, people who just dress up and will go on the battlefield, either because they had a family member who fought in the battle, or it's just something they enjoy doing. And it's not necessarily part of an event. It's just they dress up and they go out there. And I know there's some tour guides and battlefield guides who will dress up as a Civil War soldier, from the Union or the Confederacy. And we've seen them. And we've actually joked about it. There was one we were watching at the high watermark. He was like on the rocks for the angle. And he was an older guy, and he kind of looked like General Lee. He had like the long white beard, and he was dressed as a Confederate, and he had all the gear. I mean, he had the sword and the belt buckles and the boots and the hat and you know, we were just kind of joking, like, are we seeing a ghost? And we knew it was not a ghost. It was probably just around sunset. So still plenty of light. He was talking to people. But it was just funny that we're saying, oh, it's a ghost. But again, if this guy was out walking in the distance and someone saw him and then they turned around like, oh my God, and then he's gone because he crested a hill or he went behind a tree, someone might be like, oh, I saw a ghost of a Civil War soldier. So again, I'm not saying that this explains or debunks every ghost experience. I don't want to do that for people, but I approach things from a more skeptical point of view, and I try to explain things first before I say that was definitely a ghost. And I've never said it was definitely a ghost, so you'll never hear that from me. But all of that being said, just if you're on the battlefield, if you're visiting Gettysburg, keep these things in mind. Another thing to keep in mind, that there's a huge business in town for the ghost tours, and no harm, no foul. Like, if you're into that, that's great. Just be wary that a lot of the stories are embellished to make them more interesting, to sell tickets. And that's how a business is run. And you just got to be careful. And I've heard a lot of stories about a lot of groups in town, and I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to besmirch anybody. But there are certain groups in town you got to be careful of. So just do your research and go with a reputable company, someone who's going to give you a more historical based tour, even if it's a ghost tour. But just a group that's not going to lie to you and embellish things and present things to you as fact when they're really just conjecture. It's really just urban legend at this point. It's really just stories that have been passed down that may or may not be true. So keep all of that in mind. So I think that's it for everything I've been able to find online. Again, Reddit has not really helped me out on this one. Oh, here's one more story. I'll talk about this one because this goes to one of my points. Shadow Lilium, 4 years ago, says, I did, in response to, have you experienced ghosts in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania? I was on a tour bus with family, and saw two guys in all black carrying fishing poles, running fast in the farm field with what looked like wheat, near the barns that got cannon holes in them. I'm guessing he might mean the Trossel farm. I'll put a picture of that up here just so you guys can see there's a hole from a cannonball that went through the Trossel farm, through the brick. I loved fishing and pointed excitedly at them to my sis, like, look, they are going fishing. And she nodded and looked away, boredly, which not a word. I go to look back at them, and they are completely gone. They were in the middle of the field, and we were kind of high up on the hill, so there was no way to not see where they could have went. There was a road they should have crossed, but they weren't there or across it either. I think they were shadow men soldiers, and their fishing rods were guns. Interesting story, but again, I think you got to look at the more logical explanation. It's probably guys going fishing. And again, I mentioned this earlier about how people can disappear, and it's a big field and you can get distracted easily and you can kind of lose on the field where you saw them. But again, Gettysburg is just rolling hills. I mean, you can easily have guys crest a hill, go behind a group of trees, and you'll never see them. And you're saying, oh, it must have been guns and they must have been soldiers. More than likely, it was just guys going fishing, maybe hunting. But I think his first impression of, look, there's these guys going fishing is probably the correct one. But that does sound like perhaps the Trossel farm. So I'm just looking again, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, so I did promise that I would tell you a few of my own stories from Gettysburg. Now, I have to say again, I'm not saying that these were ghosts. I'm not saying that these were paranormal. In all likelihood, these are easily explainable. But I like throwing stuff out there. So I'll start with the first story. I'll try to go in chronological order. So the first story, I believe it was the very first time that I had gone as an adult. So it was myself, my wife, Laura, my father, and my uncle. And so there were four of us, and this was at night, and we were in the Wheatfield, which is just down the road a piece from Devil's Den, and very bloody battle happened there, hand-to-hand combat. The grounds, I think in like 2.5 or 3 hours, changed hands between Union and Confederate control 6 times in like 3 hours. So very fierce fighting there. A lot of the guys ran out of ammo, so it was bayonets, it was hand-to-hand combat, knives, guns, whatever they had. Supposedly very haunted. Again, nothing has ever really happened to us there. But my wife was taking photos. She was a photographer. She was a wedding photographer, professional. So she was trying to do star trails and nighttime photography. So you basically set your shutter to stay open, and as the stars move in the sky, they create these little trails. Very cool form of photography, but it leaves the shutter open for a long time. It's not just a quick click. And it works at night because it allows a lot more light in for anybody who's not familiar with photography. Anyway, we were up at the monument in the middle of the field, and her camera was pointed towards the road, and there's an opening in the sky. So it was behind the Wheatfield towards the Rose Farm. And there's a monument and a sign down at the intersection of the road. So she takes her picture and she brings it up on the little preview screen on her camera. It was a very expensive DSLR. And there's something in the photo. There's the star trails, but it looked like down by the sign, there was a person walking. And the upper part of it was a little blurry, but you could clearly see like 2 legs, or what looked like 2 legs. And again, it was at night. It was very quiet. If anybody was walking down there, we would have probably heard them. And if they were walking down there, they had no flashlight, and it was pitch black that night. It was very dark. There were stars, but there was no moon. So she pulled it up and she was like, that's weird. And we're all looking at it. And she's like, yeah, I can't wait to get this home and blow it up on the computer so we can actually see it. I mean, you can only zoom in so much on the preview screen. And she hit a wrong button and the photo got deleted. And she started freaking out. But then she was like, oh, I have the software at home. I delete photos all the time by accident. Or, the client says they don't want this. And then 2 days later, oh, I do want that photo. And she's got to undelete it. And she had a program, very expensive software program, that would undelete photos and recover them. And we were never able to. It just wouldn't find that photo. So it was weird. And again, was it a person? Was it a ghost? In all likelihood, it was either just a camera malfunction, a deer, something of that nature. I can't imagine a person walking out there without a flashlight at that time of night in the dark and not tripping and falling. I mean, there's little monuments and stones and boulders everywhere. Very dangerous to walk if you don't know exactly where you're going. But it was a cool thing to experience. And, we tried to debunk it. But again, the photo is gone. Very sad for us, but what could we do? Second thing that happened to me that was weird. This was another trip where my uncle didn't come. So it was just me, Laura, and my father. And we were at East Cavalry Field, which is where a big cavalry battle took place between General Custer and Greg from the Confederate side. So guys on horses, and just a big battle there. And there's cannons lined up along the road. We were just standing on the road at night, again, just looking up at the stars and hanging out by the cannons and just talking. We had pulled over on the road, and nobody really visits East Cavalry Field. It's very sparsely visited, and it's a few miles out, away from the main battlefield of Little Round Top and Devil's Den and the Wheatfield and Pickett's Charge and all these more famous places. So we liked going there at night because you get no cars. It was just quiet, and it was just nice to be in the Pennsylvania countryside and enjoy the evening. And I'm looking down the road, and on one side of the road, on the right-hand side, there's trees and kind of woods. And on the left-hand side, there's a line of trees, and then it's just an open field. But the trees are kind of very sparsely spaced. And I'm looking down the road, and I see, again, what looks like legs run across the road. And my first thought was that it was a deer. And I clicked on my headlamp, which is very bright, and it illuminated everything, and there's nothing. And I would have seen it in the field because there were no trees. It was running from the wooded area across the road into the field, and didn't hear anything. It was just, I saw these legs kind of run, and I didn't see a torso. So again, my first thought was deer, but the legs were much thicker, like that of a person. It looked like a person crossing the road, but I didn't see anything really from the waist up. It was just legs. So it was taller than, like, say, a raccoon or another small mammal like that. Again, my first thought was deer, but I was like, that was very thick for a deer. Those legs looked too thick for a deer. But again, my vision could have been off because it was nighttime, and I didn't see the deer, but it could have run in a different direction. But it was just one of those things that kind of caught my attention. I said, "Oh, that is interesting." And again, I don't think it was a ghost. I think it was probably a deer or just a trick of my eye just at nighttime. But interesting that the photo, we called it the Wheatfield, looked like legs sort of crossing the road. And that was a still photo, so it just looked like two legs. But then I saw legs kind of running across the road. So weird. The last weird thing that happened to me, my wife and I went down one year just for our anniversary. We were trying to, it was after the pandemic, and we were trying to, our anniversary was on her birthday. So we were trying to do something to get out of town, but things had opened up after the pandemic and everything was booked. We wanted to go like upstate Hudson River Valley, but we could find nothing. And anything we did find that was open was prohibitively expensive, just could not justify the expense. So she was like, "Hey, I found a little place in Gettysburg. We can do that for a few days if you want, you know." So yeah, that's great. So we did that. We stayed like a little Airbnb, and we went out at night. And at this point, I believe the battlefields were closed till 30 minutes after sunset, which is what they are now. It says sunset, but you're allowed to be out there 30 minutes past. And we were driving down Confederate Avenue. We're right by the Virginia Monument, which I mentioned earlier. And we pulled over and we stayed in the car. We just didn't really want to get out, but it was a nice October night. So we rolled the windows down and pulled over on the side of the road, and it was right by the auto marker tour. So if you're in Gettysburg and you're by the Virginia Monument and you want to recreate this, go to the auto marker tour and the auto tour marker. So we parked right there. That was like right in front of our car. And we're just kind of like sitting there talking and listening to the night sounds. You know, you can kind of hear crickets and just the quiet and enjoy the air. And as we're sitting there, she kind of sits up and she's like, "What was that?" And I was like, "What?" And before she could even respond, I heard it too. And it just sounded like somebody was walking up to our car. And to the left of us was the Virginia Monument. And to the right of us is just kind of woods. And then beyond the woods, there's people's houses and farms, but very far back. But right to our immediate right, there's just woods. And on the road, there's a paved road. And then it's like kind of gravel for a couple of feet. And then it's grass. And it sounded like somebody walking on the gravel, not a deer, not a small animal. It sounded like footsteps, you know, bipedal, crunch, crunch. And we both just looked at each other. And I was like, "Yeah, let's get out of here." Because it just, and I'm looking out my window. There's nobody there. There's no animal. You know, once I opened the door, I didn't hear anything run off. It just kind of approached our back door on the passenger side, which I was in the passenger seat at the time. So it sounded like it came right up to the door behind me. Just crunch, crunch, crunch. We both heard it. And we were both like, "Yeah, let's get out of here." Because that was just a little weird. And again, it could have been an animal. It sounded like a very heavy animal. It sounded like somebody walked up to the car. We were almost more scared because we thought somebody was out there approaching our car, which would have been spooky because it was dark or almost dark, just about completely dark. So I don't think we were thinking ghost at first. We were just like, "Is somebody out there?" But then when I stuck my head out the window and I'm looking and I'm like, "There's nobody here." And I open the door, and usually if there's an animal that you hear it running into the brush, you'll hear leaves and twigs and branches. And there was just none of that. It walked up to the car and then we never heard it again. So really freaky, spooky stuff. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there. I don't have any other stories of Gettysburg. We've been going a long time, have not seen much besides those three things that I've just mentioned. And I think all three of those could be explained. Just interesting stories, little anecdotes. What do you guys think? Do you think I saw some ghosts? Have you ever been to Gettysburg? Do you want to see more Gettysburg episodes? There's more I could talk about. The Cashtown Inn and so many other places. The East Cavalry Field, like I mentioned, there's so much cool history in Gettysburg. I want to give a shout out to my friend Scott, too, who's co-hosted with me on the show many, many times. Scott Perry, his great-great-grandfather fought at the Battle of Gettysburg in the 134th New York Infantry, and they have a monument up on Cemetery Hill, right across from the gate to the National Cemetery there. I'll put a picture of that up. I just posed next to it last time, but his great-great-grandfather fought there and was injured in the Civil War. So tough guy, and cool that I know somebody who has a connection to Gettysburg, whose family member fought there. That's just very cool. So Scott, I appreciate you giving me the heads up on that. It was cool seeing the marker and getting a little bit of history on your great grandfather. So maybe we'll talk about that next time you're on the show. But very cool. Again, if you guys have any stories to share, whether it's Gettysburg or otherwise, like I said, Bigfoot, UFOs, any other ghost stories, anything weird, any cryptids, you want to be on the show, or you just want to share your story and I can read it for you, keep you anonymous. Where it is, there it is. So Jason at oddanduntold.com, and I will respond to you post haste. And until next time, everybody, rock and roll.
Moonlight glowing, it fades on me and you, casting dancing shadows, the earth is draped in blue. Here in this moment, time is standing still.